Welcome to the Longest Day podcast. I'm Leah, your host and the founder of Broadstairs Consulting. We are an advisory and mediation consultancy, bringing clarity, focus, and momentum to organizations by helping leaders find creative solutions that work. We help rebuild relationships and facilitate effective dialogue. We are convinced that people matter and that conversations count, so we started The Longest Day, a series of conversations where we learn from the resilience, determination, and candor of our guests. As they look back on their longest days, our hope is that it will empower you to look forward. We hope their stories will be a part of shaping yours. Tara Austin is a behavioural and brand strategist and psychedelic evangelist. After over a decade in brand, business, and behaviour change strategy behind her at Publicis and Ogilvy, Tara has now returned to Ogilvy, one of the world's leading advertising agencies, as a partner. Tara is also the campaign director of PAR Global. It's a volunteer organisation whose mission is to reschedule psilocybin, the psychoactive compound in magic mushrooms, to make it accessible for medical research. The organisation believes this could lead to the development of new therapies and would bring hope to the suffering of millions of people in the UK with conditions that currently have limited and inadequate treatment options. We look forward to chatting with Tara today, learning more about the work of PAR Global and, of course, about her time working with Number 10 Downing Street in the COVID pandemic. Well, Tara, thank you so much for being willing to come on The Longest Day.
Thank you for having me.
Perhaps you might like to tell us about your longest day.
My longest day was the week before the lockdown. So it must have been March 2020. And it was the day that I got made redundant from the agency that I had 5% of. I ran it. And I really wasn't in any way expecting to be made redundant from the agency. Which was at the time just dealing with the terrors of coronavirus. And I got made redundant over Zoom. And I was locked in my apartment. It was the beginnings of the end for seeing people. And I lived alone. And all of the things that you would normally do when you get made redundant from your own business, like go to the pub or talk to people or get a hug and cry, I couldn't do any of those things. So I was locked in my flat with no job, no way of seeing anybody really, and that was a very, very long day.
Wow. You mention several things in that day, the first of which is that you weren't expecting this to happen. How did this come about?
So at the time I'd been a chief strategy officer for a small independent creative agency that specialised in kind of government and behaviour change communications. And that was where I was meant to be. I loved it. I'd recently brought in the creative director that I worked with at my previous agency, and we started winning lots of business together. Things were going so well. And I remember at Christmas, we'd just won the Bud Light account for the Euros for that year. And it'd been an amazing pitch, and we were all guns blazing. And he and I had never lost a pitch together, ever. In fact, we were a real kind of dream team. So I remember at the Christmas party him saying to everyone, when we hit our mid-year numbers next year, we're going to take everyone to Spain. We're going to have it's going to be a great year. 2020 was going to be a great year. And then in January, everything started falling apart. Corona was just on the horizon. The government was still our single biggest client. I think it was sort of like it was more than 55, maybe 60 to 70% of our business. And suddenly the budgets were being pulled left, right, and centre. And my business partners started to panic about that. My creative director and I just thought, hey, we're pitching, we're winning. We won another little pitch, I think for a university, just little pitch. Oh, but then suddenly they just after winning the pitch, they said, oh, well, actually, we might have to move the budget, because everyone was starting to get spooked by coronavirus. And we were convinced, no, it's fine. We're winning business. We're pitching. We're winning. And but my business partners, were much more worried than we were. And they eventually, as things kind of got more and more serious with coronavirus in February, we were looking at all our options. We were looking at how we could, who we might be able to lose in the agency. And I distinctly remember we talked about taking pay cuts ourselves as the leadership team. He and I were the most expensive people in the agency. And so he and I in particular were like, we'll take really significant pay cuts to get through this short period of time in which, we'll then bounce back and we'll save people's jobs in doing that. And I emailed my landlord, in fact, the week before I got made redundant, saying everything's going very wrong at a national level. Hopefully you will support me. Is there any chance that I could reduce my rent temporarily whilst I take a big pay cut? And I attached a photograph of myself outside the door of 10 Downing Street, because that day I'd been into Downing Street to meet with a friend, an old sort of colleague who'd brought together a team of people to try and look at how we could, make it through coronavirus and what we could do. And so I was, thinking pretty highly of myself, having gone into Downing Street, being part of this crack team of giving some advice on how to get through this, and particularly from a behaviour change perspective. I've got to say, I don't think they did any of the things I recommended, and some of them might have been very helpful. So I attached this photo, said, look, I'm a responsible business leader. Could you help me reduce the rent? And then within the week, I actually didn't have a job. And my landlord, and I came to an arrangement with them, which got me through paying my rent during that, 4 or 5 months. Ended up doing a lot of freelance work and ended up working, in fact, for the agency that had made me redundant, because bizarrely, the day after they made me redundant, I won a few £1 million worth of business on a pitch for the waste and recycling action programme for the government.
What happened to the 5%?
Oh yes. Because I hadn't worked there for, I think it's under 2 years or something, or under 18 months. I'd only been there maybe 18 months. And I'd given it my all in that time. But yeah, if you haven't been there for 18 months, I think it was legally, then you don't get the shares that you're promised in your contract. And so it was
nothing like that to make you feel like a real owner.
Yes, exactly. So watch out for that, folks. But yeah, it was. So there were lots of shocks along the way. There were lots of financial shocks and shocks in terms of the people that you trust, that you think you understand and you think you have a shared vision with, that not happening.
That's something that strikes me about what you've said. You've been the subject of a number of questionable leadership decisions. What is it about your professional expertise that makes it harder for you to stomach those decisions?
I mean, that's an interesting question. When it came to the agency that made me redundant, the leadership of that agency brought me in. They wanted me. They approached me specifically, and they asked me to come and work with them. And I was working for a big agency, Publicis at the time, and they came and asked me if I would join them and lead this agency. And I believed that a big part of that was I had expertise in behaviour change and in behaviour change campaigns, but in very much integrated behaviour change campaigns. So media agnostic. I'd worked in advertising. I'd done PR, social media, kind of made physical weird stuff in the behavioural science practice. So I'd really operated in this very, very 360 integrated way. And I'd also worked with both government, but I'd also worked with the private sector. So I had this very, very broad experience. And they didn't. They didn't have that same breadth of experience as individuals. They also, as an agency, didn't have the private sector. Yeah, I think in terms of understanding these differences of leadership and the decision-making, the process that they went through, the thing that I'm much more aware of because of that experience is that things that seem in some ways very obvious to me, like, well, we're the machinery of the agency, we're growing, we're the ones winning the business, so clearly we're your star players in some way. You're not going to get rid of us. That seemed very obvious to me. And we were at the time doing everything we could, like I say, taking pay cuts, whatever, to keep the agency going as responsible leaders. But their point of view was very different because it came from not really understanding or not really having the experience of working with some of the clients that we'd worked with and that we were there to bring in.
How did the experience of losing your job shape your future concerns and passions?
Well, this was it. I mean, it almost felt like, I know this place. So even though my life situation, the isolation, that was crushingly difficult for me. That was the bit I really, really emotionally struggled with, was the isolation of coronavirus that was happening at one and the same time. Weirdly, the being forced out of my job and where I thought it was going to be actually felt like the easy bit. And in some ways, I felt like, I know this place. I remember this from what happened at Ogilvy. I didn't expect it. I didn't want it, but it's happened. And in my own mind, I felt this is happening for a reason and that I'm obviously meant to be somewhere else and doing something else. And I felt very strongly at the time, okay, this is when I go into the public sector. This is where I actually start using my skill set, not for my own private gain, not for my own agency, but to work within the public sector. And the country seemed to be falling apart. I mean, it took
Seems to be.
Seemed. I mean, it is now too, don't get me wrong. But it took them 6 months to come up with hands, face, space as a little mnemonic to guide the public. 6 months. I mean, I mentioned I'd been into Downing Street like the week before the lockdown. In fact, well, yeah, I mean, people were still shaking hands. Let's put it that way. It wasn't the safest environment, but I really recognised at that time that there wasn't enough. There frankly wasn't enough good communications, and that was the difference between life and death for some people in that period. And I thought, I've got a skill set that this country can use right now. This is my moment where I step up out of the private sector and I joined the public sector, and I started looking at that, and I have the most ridiculous. If you were to talk about the longest day of my life, the shortest day of my life, the weirdest, most bizarre day of my life happened about 6 months later. So that was in the March. And in August, Dominic Cummings, who at the time ran the country and had been a speaker at a conference I ran for Ogilvy, Nudge Stock. It's the world's biggest festival of behavioural science and creativity, still is. And I host it again now, which is one of the greatest privileges of my life. But he'd presented there in 2017, and I knew him ever so slightly through that connection. And my boss, Rory Sutherland, who knew him, and his wife, because he writes for The Spectator, and Mary, Dominic's wife, is the deputy editor there. And so there was a sort of vague connection. Oh, and one of the other speakers from our conference in 2017 had gone on to work for Dominic in Number 10. So there was this connection. And I'd said to my friend, who was this other speaker, I'd said, look, I think I want to go into the public into public sector, into public service. There was a job that came up that Dominic was sort of masterminding for the new data science unit in Number 10. And I thought, hey, I can put myself forward to, at the very least, help with the communications around this, at the very least. And I wrote a little one-page thing, sent it off, and I got this email. I got an email in August saying, can you come into Number 10 tomorrow? This is an email from Dominic Cummings. I mean, it was sort of a very strange moment in my life. Okay, yes, went there and met him in the cabinet room. And he asked me if I would consider being the Prime Minister's spokesperson. And I think I said, do you mean the poisoned chalice job? Because it'd been in the newspapers the day before. And that's what someone had called it, the poisoned chalice. And he laughed and he said, yes, that one. And I basically said to him, look, I wasn't going to fall on my sword for Boris. God, no. But I did want to serve the country. And so we talked about a role not in front of the camera, but that would help the government. And it was still peak time Corona at that point. It was still all happening, and that terrible winter was still to come. And so I thought, okay, yeah, and we basically agreed I'd go and work for him. Long story short, and I was planning on going to work for him. I was going to come in and meet the comms director, and shortly after that, he and everyone else, they were out. And so that wasn't going to happen. Fortunately, I got a phone call from Ogilvy saying, will you please come back, which is what happened. But that meeting was far more significant for me in terms of my public service, if you like, and whatever the universe had planned for me than I ever imagined. And there was this real moment in my own mind, this sliding doors moment, sat there in front of arguably the most powerful man in the country at that point, in the cabinet room. And I thought, do I say this? Do I say this? Do I say this? Do I say this or not? And I said to him, what do you know about psychedelic medicine? And you might think that is it's a sort of completely nutty thing to say, like I'm, from Woodstock or something. And he said, not very much, go on. And we had this conversation. Arguably I was there, to talk to him about, he wanted me there to talk about this spokesperson job. But I thought, do you know what? I might never have this opportunity again. Who knows what'll happen in the future? And I was right about that. Who knows what'll happen? I might never have this opportunity to talk to this incredibly powerful man. I've got to say something about this thing that I know is the most important innovation in our lifetimes, and the thing that is the only thing that gives me hope for our species and for planet Earth, frankly. And I said to him, look, I know that we were talking about data science and how important it was for the government to communicate science effectively, and how we really ought to become a science superpower. I totally believe that. I believe in evidence-based government. How do we communicate that effectively? And I talked to him about psychedelic medicines, and I said, I know you think that the next great innovation is going to be something that like these things that we hold in our hands every single moment of our day, and the internet. And he really admired DARPA in the US and their kind of work. I said, I know you think it's something like that, but I'm telling you, the next great social innovation is going to be organic, and it's going to be more powerful than the pill or penicillin. Or vaccination, or all of these things that you don't see every day, but have shaped our world beyond belief. And that is psychedelic medicine. And we talked about the mental health crisis in the country. We talked about what was going on at the time with Corona, with grief, with our traumatized frontline workers who were seeing death around them every moment. And I said, look, this medicine has the potential to not just treat and heal depression, anxiety, addiction, alcohol, tobacco, anorexia, even gambling. Now we're seeing all of these different conditions of the mind. I said, but the real thing that I want you to take away is that actually it's not just mental health that is treated by these medicines. The ripple effect of one individual who is having their trauma effectively treated is that not only may they, in that process, have their alcohol addiction effectively treated, but they are less likely to then go on and commit crime. Most acquisitive crime in this country is driven by addictions to opiates and addictions to drugs that people use quite rationally to block out the trauma that they've experienced in their lives. And really, no matter how difficult it is, and if you've ever lived nearby to people who have alcohol or drug addictions, you'll know they don't make the best neighbours, and you might not have that much sympathy for them, and you might be afraid of them stealing your possessions. But the truth is, they were all children once, and we're not very good in this country at looking after and treating addictions, not just to those sort of hard drugs, if you like, but alcohol is addiction to alcohol in this country is terrible. It's really, really dark because it leads to a great deal of further abuse and a cycle of abuse. And so that when you treat one person of their trauma, you're also treating domestic violence. You might be treating even obesity or other conditions which put pressure on the National Health Service, but ultimately stem from poor mental health. If we can treat people's mental health in this country, the ripple effect outwards in terms of the neglect of children, the abuse of one another, the crime, the antisocial behaviour, the ripple effect is vast. The lung cancer, that stems from tobacco addiction. The medicine that we have available to us already, and I'm talking here about psilocybin, which is the psychoactive compound in magic mushrooms. There are also other psychedelics that have been used in this way in clinical trials. Like, we already have enough data now that shows us that these medicines are effective treatments for these conditions. And so we had a long conversation about psychedelic medicine, to my sort of surprise. And after that meeting in number 10, as well as going to go and work for Dominic, which was the original plan, he also connected me to a bunch of special advisors who had an interest in this. And then when Dominic was gone in November, there'd been a big vote in America, in Oregon, and everyone was talking Trump, Biden, all that sort of stuff. But Oregon was where I was looking, and they'd voted in a referendum, ballot 109, to bring in a statewide taxed system to allow the safe, regulated use of psilocybin from magic mushrooms in this way, in this healthcare system. And basically, after Dominic was gone, I had this email trail with a bunch of special advisors, and I said, hey, number 10, are you listening? Have you seen what's happened in America? Are we really going to let the Americans use our research from Imperial College London, and trying to play some ego cards, if you like, to get them to pay attention to what was happening elsewhere? And they invited me to have a meeting, and I had a couple of meetings, and I ended up chairing a meeting with Professor David Nutt, because I said, you've got to meet David, you've got to meet Robin Carhart-Harris at Imperial, who were leading the charge there. And you've got to talk to them about this research. You've got to talk to them about the data. You've got to understand it and be ahead of it, because this is coming. And they listened. And that whole process was what led me to running the campaign that I run today for psilocybin access rights. We call it the PAR campaign. Psilocybin, very annoyingly, begins with a P, sounds like an S. But the PAR campaign for psilocybin access rights, I was one of the sort of co-founders of that, and became really a lobbyist for psychedelic medicines as a result of getting made redundant from my job in the darkest days of coronavirus. And that's been the greatest gift of my life.
Are you feeling stuck? Has conflict got you down? Have you considered mediation? Mediation is a confidential and flexible way to resolve conflicts 86% of all mediations end in a solution, saving time, money, and stress for all involved. Thanet Mediation Centre, a Broadstairs consulting initiative, offers mediation services to individuals and organisations in Thanet, Kent, and further afield. For more information or advice, email us at info@broadstairsconsulting.com. We are here to help you move forwards.
I think it's absolutely extraordinary to be able to track through the fruit from someone's longest day, and that's clearly true in your situation. What would you say to someone else experiencing their longest day who doesn't have any hint of what might be on the horizon?
The future is a wonderful place, and it's just such a gift that we don't know what's coming. Wouldn't it be terribly boring if we did? It wouldn't be worth living in some ways. I think that the universe is experiencing itself through not knowing what is coming next. And that's hard. There are many, many hideous lessons that life will gift to you. And my own psychedelic experiences have been the things that have put all of this in perspective for me. They've allowed me to recognize that the moment I'm in is so precious because I don't know what's coming next. And I can believe and I can hope and I can put my energy and my purpose into following my joy. And frankly, those medicines have told me that my job in life is to bring joy to others. That is my one and only kind of purpose, if you like. But I also want to bring as much joy to myself along the way. Enjoy it. Like, this is it. And I think those medicines have also invited me to recognize that the story of my life doesn't exist. There is only now. So this idea that my ego might have had about what I'm doing or why or what kind of future I want to create for myself. I mean, I had a business coach right up until that redundancy. I had a business coach. I had a 5-year plan. I had I had a plan for the year. I was sort of trying to master my career in a way that made a lot of sense. But life is a way more beautiful, rich tapestry than that. And it's because you can't control those things. So I would say invite your ego to leave the story at the door of who you think you're going to be. There is no film of your life, and until your dying breath, you haven't made it. You haven't. The closing sequence is not playing. It doesn't need to make sense or be tied up in a neat little bow. This moment here is all that you possess, and it is so precious. And the more gratitude you can bring into your life for what you have here and what has not been lost yet, the better you will live. Well, life is a wonderful, beautiful gift, and there is so much to be found and created and enjoyed here in this moment. And that's the only place you'll ever live. You won't live in the future. You'll only ever live now.
Last question for you. Enjoyment is a key driver for you, both in terms of creating it for others and having it yourself. If you had to live your longest day again, what food would you choose to fuel it?
Well, right now I am a pretty heavily pregnant woman, and all I can think about is cream and custard. And when I was a child, there was a bakery that served these coffee-iced choux buns filled with fresh cream. And I've only found one place, even in all of London, I've only found one place. And obviously I live now down in Ramsgate and on the Kent coast. And my hometown is Hastings, and they don't serve them anymore in Hastings. And I haven't found any around here. And I've only found one place in Soho that sells coffee eclairs, choux pastry with fresh cream, not with custard, fresh cream. And if I could, I think if that were my last meal, it might be one of those. Yeah.
Oh, that is incredible. I just love the diversity of food choices that we get on this podcast, but that's a new one, and you're making me hungry. Tara, thank you so much for sharing the twists and turns of your career. Your practice is absolutely fascinating, and it's been really interesting to hear how you've gotten to where you are.
Thank you. And if anyone is remotely interested in what I've been talking about in terms of psychedelic science, please do take a look at our website. It's par.global. You can take a look at the research that's available there. You can come and join us with our activism on this issue, and feel more educated about the medicines that do exist, because I truly believe that they offer hope for millions of people who are suffering, particularly from untreatable mental health conditions or conditions that do regularly cause people to kill themselves, and that hope is the medicine as much as anything else. So if anyone is interested, par.global, please do take a look.
You've been listening to a Broadstairs Consulting Limited podcast. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. Tune in soon to hear the next instalment of The Longest Day. Copyright 2023. Production copyright Broadstairs Consulting Limited. All rights reserved.